The term forced marriage isn't one that we come across here in Vancouver very often, but it happens far more often than you might think. A couple of local organizations are now on a quest to find out more about the practice here in BC and how they can be prevented. Chany Chea spoke with Stephen Quinn on the coast.
A year ago, when you were in the earliest stages of this project, what did we know about forced marriage in Canada?
Not much. The only research in Canada at that time was SELCO's research. That's the South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario. And they found that there were 219 cases of forced marriage in Ontario within the period of 2 years. And the research was really all we knew about the instances of forced marriage in Canada.
Okay, and so for this study, then who did you talk to?
We talked to key informants. So these are people who have experience of forced marriage and over 20 years of knowledge of the issue in the UK, in Canada, across Canada. And we also interviewed service providers across BC. And we interviewed community members as well from various different ethnocultural communities.
And some people might associate forced marriage or arranged marriage with South Asian culture. Your research shows that that's a bit of a fallacy, though. So what did you discover about just where forced marriage happens in Canada?
Right. I just have to make a bit of a correction there because you said forced marriage or arranged marriage.
Pardon me, yes.
And those are two separate things. Arranged marriage shouldn't be confused because it is essentially your families are involved and acting as sort of matchmakers, but in the end, the individuals getting married should have a choice and a voice and a choice in that decision. In forced marriages, there is that no choice.
And what are the implications of that, though, people not understanding the difference, that gap between what an arranged marriage might be and what a forced marriage actually is?
I think the implications of that is that we view it as a cultural practice because arranged marriage is perceived as a cultural practice, right?
So give me the scenario in most forced marriages, then. What actually happens?
In most forced marriages, the characterizing feature of them is coercion and duress. And that happens under, it could be physical or emotional violence. Okay. So, guilting somebody into marrying someone because without not marrying them would shame the family, or just keeping somebody in captivity in order to force them to marry someone else.
I appreciate you making the distinction. Thank you. But what did you discover then about where forced marriage is happening in Canada?
Well, actually, our focus group participants were from 13 different countries. And so they were from places in Asia, Africa, North and South America, and in the US, in the UK, and Canada. All of that research says that victims of forced marriage come from all of the different countries around the world.
And do we know why people end up in forced marriages?
There are several reasons. It can be for an economic exchange of land, for citizenship reasons, sponsorship. It can be to control sexuality. So if somebody is perceived to be promiscuous, or from identifying as LGBTQ, that can be used as a way to control that. And there can be several reasons why, but ultimately it is a gendered issue where predominantly women are being forced into marriage, and it is the assumption that women should be controlled by men and their families that causes forced marriage.
I mentioned this is just the first phase of the study. What do you do now with what you've learned in the first year?
We are developing a risk assessment framework, and the objective of that is to increase safety for women and girls, and we're going to do that by guiding service providers with this framework, and it will give the service providers information about the different dynamics and dangers behind forced marriages.
Chany, it's great to talk with you about this today. Thanks so much for taking the time with us.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.